Well, welcome to the Pre-Employment Transition Services Training for past VRS grantees. We are thrilled to have you all here today. And in the room, we have a number of people for you to maybe be aware of, and maybe you are aware of some of us, but not all of us. So we actually have Alyssa Klein, which I'm sure you are all aware of. She is our VRS Transition and Pre-Ed Specialist. We have Michelle Chmielewski, and she's our VRS Placement Specialist. Ann Paulson was not able to join us today, so she will not be delivering the presentation, but I am Ann Macklin, and I'm a VRS Staff Development Specialist, and all three of us will be here to support you through some of this information today. So our learning objectives today, we are going to be reviewing the new VRS structure for providing pre-eds. We're going to be introducing some information to you so that you understand some of the pre-eds PT contract definitions and going over that thoroughly. We are hoping that you'll learn a little bit more about the VRS referral process for pre-eds. And then we have some information to review related to pre-eds reporting and invoicing. So as you finish up those pre-ed services, that you have some of that available to you to know how to do those reports and invoice us. And I'm going to pass it to Alyssa to kick us off.
All right. This is Alyssa Klein. Hello, everybody. So first of all, just a little bit of background information for all of you. Many of you may know this, but some of you may not. So I wanted to be clear about why some things have changed in our contracting with your agency. First of all, our agency, Minnesota Vocational Rehabilitation Services, receives guidance from the Rehabilitation Services Administration, or RSA, as well as WINTAC, which is the National Technical Assistance Center for the voc rehab agencies across the country for implementing WIOA. And it's interesting, we get updates from them over time, and some information we got over this past year was, first of all, that we should not be granting the dollars. So your agencies received a contract and funding through from Vocational Rehabilitation Services from a grant. And we learned that now going forward, we need to expend funds on a per student basis, which means fee for service basis. And when we talk more about rates and all of that, that's going to make more sense. But so the way we contract had to change. And another piece of information that we learned is that we need to have more internal controls over the services. In particular, assessing the needs a student has for pre-employment transition services. And once those are assessed, then a referral to a community agency can happen. So that is why not only did we have to change our contract, but we also had to hire some internal staff to do the upfront work of enrolling students, assessing their needs, and then referring to our community partners. So the result, again, I've already alluded to this, but we're moving from the grant to the professional and technical contract, which starts tomorrow, well, as early as tomorrow. Your grant ends today. These contracts are not fully executed, and they will not be fully executed tomorrow. We are waiting for them to come back from the Department of Administration. We're hoping it will be in a matter of a few days, and we will be keeping your agency leadership informed as soon as we get them back. It takes a number of steps to get a contract in place and a number of entities to sign off on the contracts. So that's why it's a bit delayed, but we will keep you posted on that. And then, of course, again, the result of what has changed is that we've hired 23 new pre-eds representatives, which is one for each VRS team in the state. And before going forward with any other information, I just want to give each and one of you my sincere thanks for your leadership and excellence in building our pre-eds program here in Minnesota, as well as being patient with us as we have had to make these shifts along the way. Your partnership in providing pre-eds is very important to us, and we hope we can continue that partnership long into the future. So again, thank you very much for all you have done and what you will continue to do going forward. I also wanted to just, before we dig into other matters, we've had conversations, I think, with all of you at this point, but I just wanted to remind you, again, those grants end after today, and what should happen is that we need to make sure that the students on your caseload are either, number one, exited because they've turned age 22 or are no longer enrolled in an education program. Therefore, they're not eligible for pre-ETS. So if you could, go through your list of students and indicate which ones need to be exited. You no longer are able to exit them, and either our pre-ETS representative or one of our field operations specialists can do that for you. So if you have any questions about that, let me know, but I think we've been communicating, with most of you on this. Of course, make sure that you're reviewing the list of students that continue to need services and talk with the local pre-ETS representative to ensure that authorizations can be in place as soon as possible, as soon as your contract is executed after October 1st. And then any other students that you haven't had contact with, the best practice will be to exit those students as well on October 1st. We can always reopen those cases within the next 12 months. It just helps to keep it cleaner, and we know who's really actively engaged right now. So any questions on that can always go to me at any time. All right. So let's move into the structure now going forward for the VRS agency in providing pre-employment transition services. So as we are working with schools and the community and all of you, we want to recognize that now we have two types of VRS services. We have services for students who are potentially eligible for the VR program, and then students who are eligible for the VR program. And this stuff on this slide is not necessarily new to all of you, but I just wanted to be real clear about how we're explaining this to schools going forward. So for students who are potentially eligible, we have the description of what those services are. So they're basic exploratory services that are limited to the 5 pre-ETS activities, which you all know well. And they're often provided in groups. And we say often because we want to provide group services as much as possible so we can serve more students, knowing that it's not always going to be that way, but we would like to have them offered that way as much as possible. And then description for our VR services for eligible students is that it's a comprehensive service that can include the 5 pre-ETS activities as well as other needed VR services, and those are often provided one-on-one. And then the target population for potentially eligible students or potentially eligible services is younger students and those with quote-unquote less significantly impacting disabilities, whereas our services for those that are eligible for VR are older students and those with more significantly impacting disabilities. How to qualify for, and your agencies have been doing this, so you know this very well. They need to have a documented disability, they need to be in an education program, and grade 9 through age 21. It also includes those on our VR wait list that would like to receive pre-ETS services. And then for VR, regular VR services, it's a more comprehensive service and a more comprehensive eligibility process. But basically, the student has applied for and been determined eligible and has 3 or more functional limitations. Lastly, the length of service, of course, for potentially eligible students is until they leave school or turn age 22. And then for eligible students, it's as long as needed and until the student is successfully working in competitive integrated employment. And now we have 2 roles in our agencies. So we've had VR counselors, and now we have pre-ETS representatives as well. And the roles are the same in that they both manage a caseload, they're both doing outreach to schools, they're both providing pre-ETS to students with disabilities, as well as referring and doing service authorizations for pre-ETS services. And of course, they're both a part of the VR team and an integral part of that VR team. And where their roles are different is that our pre-ETS representatives are only providing pre-ETS services, whereas the counselor provides both pre-ETS and VR. Pre-ETS representatives are only serving potentially eligible students, whereas VR counselors. Our pre-ETS representatives will be doing broad outreach to many of the schools within that team's territory, whereas VR counselors are the lead VRS representative for a smaller number of schools. So it's a broader outreach role for our pre-ETS reps. Pre-ETS representatives are providing a lighter touch service, VR counselors more intensive, and then there's more of the group and one-on-one, whereas the counselors are just doing one-on-one. So going into the school year, our teams are really looking at prioritizing the schools that we want to make sure we're starting with in terms of pre-ETS for potentially eligible students. I want you to be aware there's a link on this page. I'm not going to pull it up right now, but you should have that in your PowerPoint, to a page on our website that has the directory of all the schools. And there are two different directories. One is with our counselors who are assigned, and then the other directory is which pre-ETS representative is assigned. So as our staff are going out to the schools, they're going together and talking about these two levels of VR services, assessing and discussing with schools what pre-ETS are already providing so we're not duplicating services, and then talking about how the schools can refer students. And recruitment includes partnerships with schools, families, other organizations. And in terms of initial paperwork, of course, students who are eligible or want services for students who are eligible would complete the VR application. And then students who are interested in the services for potentially eligible students would complete the request for pre-ETS. And again, I know you are all familiar with that paperwork. And this just reviews the processes for potentially eligible versus eligible students. And so the process for potentially eligible is a lot simpler. For students who are eligible for VR, one thing to really keep note of is that for a VR counselor to approve of a service, it needs to be on an employment plan in order to authorize for a service. And so whereas with our potentially eligible students, we don't complete employment plans with them, we're able to just provide the services. Okay, now Anne's going to talk to you a little bit more. I know we've talked to you about this, but we really want to emphasize how pre-ETS are about exploration and not assessment.
Yeah, so you've had some exposure, maybe experience with this, but we wanted to really reinforce the fact that pre-ETS are about exploration, not assessment. And here's just, we thought it'd be good to do a synonym comparison so you can kind of see the difference of the words that are drawn to each one. So as we look on the synonym side, under exploration, there are words such as search, or maybe a student's figuring out where they want to go and what direction to go. An inquiry, where the student might ask a lot of questions to learn and make some decisions about what they want to do. And journey and adventure, where during that experience or that trip per se, the individual may find out something about themselves and the world that they live in and what they want to choose further out. On the flip side, when we look at the synonyms attached to assessment, you may think of words such as evaluation and recommendation, Recommendations are, of course, that end product of many assessments and what we might be looking for to help in our vocational planning with individuals. And other great synonyms could be estimation, appraisal, analysis. So with such words, you can kind of see, you get this image of a third party or a person coming in to conduct an evaluation against a certain standard or expectation, or an expert coming in to provide recommendations regarding the situation or the scenario and what you should do next. So in essence, when we look at exploration experiences, pre-ETS exploration experience specifically, they're meant to be more self-discovery based, student-driven, and person-centered in nature. It's when the individual is given the opportunity to understand their own interest and speak to what they like or disliked or learn from the experiences. With those experiences, the student has a chance to self-reflect a bit more and gain some insight over time to determine their next step of what they want to do and with what they've learned. And those types of self-driven exploratory learning experiences, at least in RSA's interpretation, are defined as pre-ETS and should be coded as such. On the other hand, for many assessments in our VR world, there's often that evaluator or VR staff doing the assessment with the hope to better understand an individual's interests and their skills and abilities, which is really important. But in typical assessments, it's the staff assessing and trying to observe the individual, write down their ratings and recommendations, and determine the limitations and needs, all for the purpose of that end comprehensive report. So the assessment is not driven by the individual. It is something else, someone else coming in and obtaining that information and then drawing those conclusions about the situation and the fit. So kind of making those comparisons, you can see that when determining whether it's pre-ETS or VR services, it's important on the pre-ETS side that it be student-driven, that it be informal, to the person figuring out what they're liking and what they don't like, and that services are informal, and that the student or the employer have a chance to give the feedback on the experience and the reporting. Assessment, on the other hand, is more that third-party, VRS staff-driven type of experience where they're providing the service, where it's a more formal kind of evaluation type of thing, and then you get a report at the end. So we thought that might be a good way to just draw the comparison so you can see when you're in those spaces of providing that service, you can think of it that way and know which is driving more pre-ETS versus an assessment type services and lean towards the pre-ETS side for that.
All right. So let's shift gears now and dig into each of the 5 activities in terms of how they're going to be listed on your contract and what the definitions are. So we're all very clear about what services you'll be providing or your agency will be providing going forward. And there is a link here to this document, which is the definitions for PT contracts. I also, this afternoon, I was late, I put the link on the page that other links for today were listed as well. This definitions sheet was just updated online today. There's a couple changes that we made, and I'll be speaking to that in the presentation. But you can note that, oh, that's the old one right there. But anyway, it's the link on the, I don't know why that came up with the old one, but anyway, the link on the website is correct. And again, I'll be, as we go through the definitions, calling out what has been changed on there. It's just a couple somewhat minor, but still important changes. All right, so let's dig into what's on, in terms of on that form and what you may be including in your contracts. The first service is pre-ETS job exploration counseling. Of course, job exploration counseling is intended to foster motivation, consideration of opportunities, and help the student in informed decision making. So there's only one service title within this pre-ETS activity area, and it's called Job Exploration Counseling Services. And so if you're providing that service, you'd be working with the student to explore interests, explore the labor market, in-demand industries and occupations, possibly non-traditional employment options, and also to help them identify career pathways of interest.
Another definition that we wanted to bring up related to those pre-ETS services is pre-ETS post-secondary education counseling. So that's when you're assisting a student with enrolling or remaining enrolled in post-secondary education or training by helping them do, and we have a whole list of things here that we probably won't read each individual one, but it could be anywhere from, identifying what post-secondary education and training options there are, or setting up goals to align with those education and training options. It could be looking about applying for financial aid. So those are just some of the examples that are on here. And we really encourage you to look this over because we know we have a number of different ideas for you to kind of absorb there.
All right. Another pre-ETS activity, one of the 5, is pre-ETS workplace readiness training. And within this broad type of pre-ETS service, there's 4 different services you can be providing. And number 1, here's where the first change on that PT definitions page happened. We're now calling this benefits information services. It's when if you're providing that service, you'd be assisting a student to understand how their SSI benefits work, or perhaps they're receiving medical assistance. Anyway, if they're receiving public benefits, how they work in order to help them with their career planning. But it's meant to be a high-level overview and more general in nature. And then another service is independent living services or training, so helping a student to gain skills that can help them be more independent, so financial literacy, communication skills, and other soft skills, etc. Number 3 is public transportation training, so that would be if you were to assist a student to understand how to use public transportation. I will note we get a lot of questions about can our organization help a student to take the permit test, or to study for that, or for driver's training. And unfortunately at this point RSA has said that cannot be a pre-ETS service. So when it comes to transportation, it's just around using public transportation. And then number 4 under this list is job seeking skills training, and we have the definition on the next slide. And basically it's equipping the student with skills so they could do their own job search. So how to practice filling out applications and interviewing, addressing their disability needs with an employer, things like that. So that, again, I would love to see this happen more often, where students can learn how to find their own jobs so they don't have to depend on a system to help them with finding a job.
The next area of pre-ETS service is instruction and self-advocacy, and that can involve a number of different things. So it could be arranging and providing opportunities for a person to just understand their disability and its impact. It could be learning about and actually finding ways to request accommodations, services, supports, and assistive technology. It may involve mentoring opportunities, whether that be peer mentoring, disability mentoring, group mentoring, or e-mentoring. It also could be learning about their own personal rights and responsibilities, and that's a big piece in what they might need to know. And lastly, it could be participating in youth leadership activities offered in educational community settings. And then we also have a pre-ETS work-based learning experiences here, and we lay out 7 service titles that fall under work-based learning. The first one is career mentoring experience, so that opportunity for a student to engage with a mentor who might give them career guidance or advice. Informational interviewing, which I'm sure many of you are familiar with, that conversation with the student and learning more about somebody's job or career that they might be interested in. It could be job shadowing is another one under work-based learning. So an opportunity for the student to observe different jobs and ask business questions to learn more about the skills and knowledge and abilities that are needed in that job. Service learning is another work-based learning type of service where you're facilitating an activity for a student that integrates meaningful community service with classroom instruction, and get a chance to reflect on those learning experiences and teach civic responsibility and strengthen those communities. Workplace tours or field trips, finding out more, going on-site to the business and then getting a chance to ask questions.
And then we have probably the biggie, which is work experience services. So that is where your agency would be working with the student to facilitate a work experience intended for the student to understand the nature of work and build soft skills. Again, we want to emphasize here that when, in terms of how the experience is going, once that student is on the job or work experience, that only the student and business report how the experience is going so that it's not considered assessment. And we also want to really be clear on this one that it does not encompass job coaching. If an eligible student needs job coaching, the counselor could refer for that service if it's needed. Potentially eligible students are not able to receive job coaching funded by VRS, so we have to be really clear on that because it's just not an allowable pre-ET service, at least at this time. We're hoping they're going to change their mind and we'll get some information on that down the line, but at this time, potentially eligible students cannot get job coaching. And so also to be clear that when a counselor or a pre-ETS representative is authorizing for this service, that those hours can be used for any of these 4 items. So, and we're going to have some examples in a little bit here so to help everybody wrap their head around this because I know I've had a lot of questions about it. But it can include the first meeting with the student and the counselor rehab rep or pre-ETS rep, where you're developing a placement plan, and we're going to talk about the placement plan in a little bit. But that first meeting cannot be called an intake because intakes are not allowed as a pre-ET service, which kind of goofy, but it's just one of those things. But you can have a first meeting, and so it's just authorizing those service hours for that first meeting. It can be the time that your agency takes to help that student set up that experience or find the work experience. It can also be the time for orienting the student to the work experience. Again, it's different than job coaching, but it's helping them understand like who their supervisor is and what's their schedule, and just making sure they understand what the experience is before they get into it and that they're well prepared in terms of having a uniform and having their transportation figured out. And then it's also some follow-up check-in with the student employer just to see how it's going. And again, that's based on the student's needs, and that should be discussed as a team, how often your agency will be checking in with that student, etc. And this is, on this page, this is another piece that's been changed to, I think you'll all be happy to hear this. We've made some communication and some different, some changes to defining this service. So, and I'll point that out when we get there. So there are 2 reasons that either a VR counselor or a pre-ETS representative may refer a student for work experience services from a community partner. The first would be to gain a work experience where the employer pays the wages. Essentially, it's a job in the community. But it's still under the umbrella of work experience because it's a pre-ET service. So it's when a provider is providing what we would call job placement services. And a counselor or pre-ETS representative can authorize up to 20 hours for all items on the previous slide. So, Anne, if you just go back there to the previous slide, I just want to be clear again, 20 hours for all 4 of these items. So that's one reason for a referral. The second reason could be to gain a work experience where your agency or a provider is paying the wages. And so this is a short-term work experience. The change here is that the counselor or pre-ETS representative can authorize up to 5 hours, per on the previous slide, if the student will be placed in a set site. So if your agency has a site already developed, so you don't need to work on that piece of it, we have up to 5 hours. If your agency does not have a set site and you need to develop that, then the counselor or rehab rep can authorize up to 20 hours. I know that's where there was questions and feedback that I received from many of you that it can take just as long to set up a work experience site as it can take just as long to do that as it is to help a student find a job. So we've changed that piece. Also note on here we say that the best practice, and it's not, doesn't mean it's set in stone for all students, but a best practice when you're not sure of how long a work experience should go is that it would be 120 hours for the student, but it can be less, it can be more. It's based on, you all working as a team to decide that. And again, those other hours, the 20 and the 5 hours, can extend longer, but that needs to be approved by our local manager, or RAM. So the counselor or the pre-ETS representative would need to get approval for that. And lastly, is work experience wages. So this goes along if a student is getting a work experience where your agency is paying the wages. We have a separate category for that because we have to authorize separately for it. So it's to pay the wages and the personnel costs for that student to be in that work experience. And basically it's whatever the hourly rate is. Well, the hourly rate is the actual wage plus 25% to cover your administrative costs. At this time, we will not be referring for unpaid work experiences. If a student needs to look for an unpaid work experience, our staff will be working with our internal placement staff for that. Just because we really want to encourage more of the paid work experiences out in the community. And again, we'll have some examples. We're going to come back to the work experience services with some examples in a little bit. But before that, we want to talk more about the VRS referral process. Okay. So when you receive a referral, you will see either one of two referral forms. And I'm going to pull these up in a sec here, but we have a general, what we call the universal referral form that all of our counselors use when referring an eligible individual in our program to a community provider. And this is a form we've used for many years, so our counselors are really used to using that form. It pre-populates into Workforce One, which is also nice when making that referral. But then for students who are potentially eligible, we have a pre-ETS referral form for potentially eligible students. So, and again, I'm going to pull them up in a second, and you'll see how they're different. But the reason why we have two forms is that the information that we collect for eligible students is different than the data we collect for the potentially eligible. And again, you've all been providing pre-ETS to potentially eligible students, so you know that we get pretty minimal data, probably compared to the other programs you all have in your agency as well. So we're getting their name, we're just verifying that they have a disability, but we're not necessarily getting any information about that disability, their contact information, and some other minimal information about what kind of services they want. But for eligible students, we do have more information, and we can share more information with you, and that is why we're using two different forms. So we'll pull up just real quickly so you're aware with what they look like. And again, I had links to these forms sent out to you today. And so this is our universal referral form. This is what you will see for students who are eligible for VR. So you will have, they'll check off which of these services the student is interested in. You will see that right now we do not have pre-ETS services listed yet. I'm going to be working on that, but there is an other category, so they will need to be typing in what the service is in that section. And then I won't go through the rest too in depth, but just other information about that student. And then when we go to the pre-ETS referral form, it looks like this. So it says for potentially eligible students. So again, you'll get basic information about that student, their contact information, and then when you go down the form, it will say the reason for the referral and then which of the pre-ETS services they're interested in receiving. We also, to make it more clear about what exactly we are hoping the result will be, and this will be, again, our pre-ETS representatives completing this, they will be listing what they hope the student gets out of referring that student to you, so you know exactly what to provide. So say if it's job exploration counseling, it might be help the student to research different job ideas related to their interests. It could be something as simple as that. And there's a third page of the referral form that I'm not going to review right this second. We're going to come back to this in a little bit. So those are the two forms that you will see when it comes for referring. And then let's go to the next slide. But now what we do want you to understand is that VRS for a number of years in working with our community partners has outlined a particular process for job placement services. And all of it is really meant to help us engage and everyone to know their roles when it comes to a person served by the VRS agency looking for a job in the community. And so to talk through this process a bit with you, we have Michelle Shimoleski here. Again, she introduced herself, or Ann actually introduced her a little earlier, but she's going to talk about this process and some of the forms related to that you will see. So here is Michelle.
Good afternoon, everyone. We are going to start a conversation about work experience when the employer pays the wages. We'll actually be considering that job placement services. We'll continue to use our VRS placement team approach to ensure that all parties stay engaged and know their roles throughout the job search and retention process. The placement team approach will include the student, the counselor, or the pre-ETS rep and the community partner. Some additional members of the team may be introduced as far as school staff and the students' families. So for eligible students enrolled in the VR program, we will still be utilizing the invitation to placement team form. You'll also be receiving an assessment of VR needs, a sample application, and a resume if available.
Yeah, let's pull up that invitation. So I'll just jump in. This is Alyssa Klein. So you will still get that for the eligible students. You would get that referral form. But then for students that are looking for a job where an employer pays their wages, so a job in the community, you'll also get this invitation to placement. And Michelle will walk you through just a little bit of that. So again, you're just going to get some basic information, right? And then you were going into some of those pieces that also will be included where it says required. So the assessment of VR needs. We actually have a sample employment application, like a template that we use. I also have linked that on the DEED website where you got the PowerPoint and everything today, so that you'll see that would come with it too.
Yeah. So that is for students that are eligible for VR that are working with a VR counselor. For students that are potentially eligible that are working with the rehab services rep, the rep will be submitting pages 1 through 3 of the pre-ETS referral form, also a sample application, and a resume if the student has a resume available.
So if you go back to that, the referral form for pre-ETS for potentially eligible students, you will typically only get pages 1 and 2 for all other pre-ETS services, but you will get page 3 where it says complete this section for work experience services only. So that's where, as Michelle just said, that you will get the sample employment application, and the I-9 documentation will be verified. I know you'll talk about that a little bit more in a bit. If they've done an interest inventory or a resume, they would send that along. So anyway, just know that you will get this page, which mirrors that invitation to placement information for students that are potentially eligible.
So moving forward with working with the students, the first step will be to conduct a meeting with the student, the VRS counselor, or the pre-ETS rep. During that initial meeting, a placement plan will be completed for both eligible and potentially eligible students. The placement plan must be signed by the VR counselor or the pre-ETS rep, the student, and the community partner.
So this is what the placement plan looks like, and you'll talk that through in a little bit more, right, on another slide.
Yep, we'll be talking that through as we move forward. So let's take a look at some of the potential placement services that may be provided to a student to assist them with their job search. Keep in mind that all services are always tailored to meet the needs of each individual student. So you may help with identifying and developing job opportunities, may involve researching the labor market, contacting employers, showing the job seeker resources for job search like Career Force Center classes, doing some research on job openings on Minnesota Works and other job boards, perhaps assisting with creating and updating resumes. It's very much an ongoing process, tailoring the resume to fit the job that they are currently applying for. Completing employment applications, paper and online. Occasionally they can be very challenging. Job seeker may also need assistance with the various pre-employment tests that many employers use, such as personality and aptitude tests. Helping the student prepare for job interviews, reviewing and practicing sample interview questions, perhaps arranging for mock interviews when possible, setting up some informational interviews when needed, working with the student to complete cover letters, thank you letters, and job search emails. You as a provider may want to discuss the importance of this job search paperwork with the job seeker and possibly help them with creating some templates to use. You'll also be making sure that the job applications that are submitted are a good match. Be sure to assess the position and the environment and determine if there will be any needed accommodations. Working with employers to identify and eliminate barriers. This may include suggesting modifications, necessary supports while addressing structural and attitudinal barriers. Just keep in mind that placement services are not only limited to this list. So with the next 3 slides, we'll be talking about pre-job search activities that will be addressed by VRS staff prior to the signed placement plan meeting. Some potentially eligible students may work with you or another community partner to complete the pre-job search activities. Pre-job search activities will be reviewed with the job seeker prior to the signed placement plan meeting. As we described, we'll be using the placement team approach where we're clearly defining the roles of each team member. As a reminder, the VRS counselor or pre-ETS representative is the facilitator of the team, and all team members have roles and expectations. In addition to the core team, other team members may include school staff, family, social workers, and IL staff. We want to be sure that we're utilizing informed choice. If possible, the job seeker is encouraged to visit or interview a variety of placement professionals, and it is ultimately the job seeker's choice who they work with for placement services. We'll want to keep in mind their interests, their goals, skills, abilities, and any potential criminal backgrounds as they relate to the job market. Credit reports and credit history may not impact students, but this service is available if the counselor or the pre-ETS rep want to discuss that with the student. So we're continuing to discuss the pre-job search activities. Again, these are all items that the counselor, rehab rep, and the job seeker will review and discuss in preparation for the invitation to placement and throughout the placement process. We'll want to continually meet the individual where they are at. For example, when discussing transportation, think more about getting to and from work, as some job goals have specific transportation requirements in place. For example, a car detailer or a mechanic may be required to have a driver's license. It may be valuable to discuss disability disclosure in preparation for job search, as this is an area that will likely need ongoing review and discussion as an individual participates in job search. So we'll want to verify the employment authorization documents. The counselor or the pre-ETS rep often use the USCIS website as a good resource to see what documents are acceptable for employment, such as a state ID and Social Security card. We are not allowed to make a copy of the documents, but we encourage the VR counselor and pre-ETS rep to view the documents to ensure that the job seeker has those documents available to complete new hire paperwork. The job seeker should also have their employment authorization documents available and safely stored, as the employer will need these items when they accept a job offer. So all team members will continue to discuss disability disclosure, supported employment, independent living and benefits service throughout the entire placement process. Remember, VR is unable to fund job coaching services to students that are potentially eligible. The team will continue ongoing conversations about any necessary reasonable accommodations, natural supports, and a supportive work culture for the student. Your agency staff person who provides the placement services is considered the placement professional. The placement professional leads the conversation and discussion with the job seeker and the VR counselor and pre-ETS rep throughout the development of the placement plan. This is the placement plan, the VR placement plan. Do we have a link? So the VR placement plan is a template for identifying the responsibilities of each of the core team members: the job seeker, the placement professional, the VRS counselor or pre-ETS rep. The responsibilities should be identified and agreed upon by the team during the placement plan meeting. Not all items will be applicable for each job seeker. Select only the items that apply. It is very important to discuss the expectations of each party involved. Each core member will assign the placement team. Some of our providers have incorporated the VR placement plan into their own placement plan. That is fine as long as the roles and responsibilities are clearly defined in the placement plan. All core team members will sign the placement plan, and each member should receive a signed copy of that plan.
Great. Thank you so much, Michelle. And of course, for many of you, this might be a whole new concept. Our agency worked to define these things so that, the process can go more smoothly. And it also puts more emphasis on what our VRS staff can do prior to referring a student to you for you to help them find a job. So I think a lot of that is really nice to have that defined. Things like having their ID and social security card, things like that, knowing that those are where they are at and that the student has those things prior is an example of why this process is so well laid out and a good thing. So let us know if you have any questions on that. Michelle is our lead placement specialist for pre-ETS, so she and I will be working together quite a bit related to things related to work-based learning. So I know she'd be available for questions too.
Absolutely. My email and contact information is at the end of the PowerPoint, so feel free to reach out with questions about the placement process that's been developed.
Thank you so much, Michelle. Okay, so we're talking about the referral process. The other piece of a referral is that you want to make sure that you get the authorization, and I'm going to pull up an authorization. Before doing that, just note that this authorization, it's going to look similar for every student that you would be providing services for. This must be done prior to your agency providing services. That's really important. So again, you'll want to have a copy of it to ensure it's in place, or else you won't want to provide services without seeing that, because we wouldn't be able to reimburse you for those services without it. So yeah, I have an example of a sample authorization for you, just so you can know what it looks like. This is actually for a student, her name's Taylor Swift, who she's going to be in a work experience where the provider has a set site, and so in this case the provider is RISE. And you'll see at the top of the page it says service dates. Those are important. So for Taylor Swift, she had this completed in September. The only dates that the provider could provide those services was September 16th through September 30th of 2019. So that's one piece that's really important for you all to be looking for in these authorizations, are the dates that you can be providing those services, not before those dates or after those dates. And so if time runs out, like her authorization is done today, and if she still is in need for services for the month of October, there needs to be a conversation between your agency staff and either the counselor or the pre-ETS representative to make sure there's another authorization in place for October. But in this case, again, Taylor was going to be working in a work experience site, and so because it was a set site, the provider, RISE, is going to be helping her to orient to the site as well as following up with her. So we authorized for 5 hours to do that at $75 an hour. So you'll see what exactly the services are. That's also important to make sure it's the correct services that you're going to be providing. And then also we authorized for the wages. So she's going to work 40 hours within that time frame. In this case, she was earning minimum wage at that work experience, which is $9.86 an hour. So if you figure in the 25% administrative costs, it ends up being $12.33 an hour to your agency or this agency. So that's another important piece, is to look at the number of hours that have been authorized and make sure it's the correct services. And then it also has the information on where you bill to. So you can see it says to Megan out of the Shakopee office was for this authorization. All right, and then just discussing rates. We have worked with all of you and all of our other providers that provide pre-ETS services to come up with a consistent and standardized rate structure statewide. And so once your contracts are fully executed, we will have them online. Your agency will have a copy of them, and our staff will also be able to see them to know which of the pre-ETS services your agency is going to provide. The rate structure will be within that contract as well, but again, it's going to be standardized statewide. And so for you to know what they are, your leadership knows this, but we just wanted to include some slides so you can refer back to these as well. So, yep, you can go to the next slide, Ann. So this slide is for all of the services if you were providing one-on-one services in any of the pre-ETS service titles that we reviewed earlier. And it's if your agency was not traveling over 25 miles to provide the services. So $75 an hour to provide one-on-one services for any of the pre-ETS services. And then we also have group rates. So again, this is if your agency is traveling under 25 miles from your base where your office is. And then it shows you on here the costs if there's 2 students in a group up to 15 students in a group. And what those are, well, I'll tell you this, and I'm going to get to that in a moment, but our staff will be always authorizing at the highest rate for the individual rate and then adjusting the billing when you bill us for those services. So you won't see an authorization at any of these rates, but you will be invoicing us based on that. And I have a slide in a minute that will explain that a little bit more. But Ann, if you could go ahead and go to the next slide. We also have rate structures for travel differentials. So we have if you or somebody in your agency is traveling between 26 and 50 miles from your office, what the rate should be. And so we have from individual all the way up to 15 in a group. And then we have for 51 to 75 miles, 76 to 100, and then 101 to 125 miles. Just because we know, obviously, it costs more to travel that far to provide those services. And then related to group services. So VRS will pay based on the number of students who we referred and also who attended. So it's really important to know that a student must, students referred must be enrolled with VRS either as an eligible or potentially eligible student first. And again, that authorization needs to be in place, and you will want to have that to know that we will be paying for that student to be in that service. Also, VRS cannot pay for those who were referred and didn't attend. Unfortunately, RSA does not allow us to pay a no-show fee. So we'll all want to work together hard to make sure, everybody is reminded of when there's going to be programming and a provider is going to be going to provide a service. So, and then this is where I'm coming back to where I said our VRS staff, when they authorize, they're always going to be authorizing for the individual rates, the highest amount, because we can always take that authorization after you bill us and go down in the amount, but we can't go up. So you will always see that probably typically the $75 an hour unless you typically travel further distances. So it's just going to be a matter of your agency billing us based on the number of students who actually attended that service. It's also important that if your agency is providing a group service, that you'll want to keep a class list which documents which students attended. And then in the cases where your agency allowed additional students to attend that weren't referred by VRS, you'll just want to indicate which students were actually referred by VRS. That is the primary thing at this point that you'll want to keep track of, excuse me, for monitoring purposes, and I'll talk about monitoring towards the end here. I said this earlier, but intake is not allowed, but you can author, or VRS can authorize for that first meeting, so we just can't call it an intake, basically. And then I said on the next slide, again, we aren't able to pay a no-show fee either, so your agency will want to confirm appointments or classroom visits ahead of time, and please be sure to let VRS staff know if a student doesn't show, because we're going to want to follow up on that pretty quickly so that that doesn't happen again. All right, so we've got a couple examples here. This is again related to work experience services because I know that that's a more difficult one to understand. So let's go through this. The first example is Stephen. He's a senior in high school. And he's never had a job, and so he would like help to get a pre-ETS work experience where the employer pays the wages. He said that he's interested in stocking at a retail store. He has chosen to work with a community program called XYZ to help him find that job. So in this case, it could be a counselor or a pre-ETS representative working with Stephen. They would authorize an agreed upon number of hours to XYZ to assist Stephen in obtaining that stocking job. And so we would authorize at $75 an hour for that under work experience services. So in Stephen's case, it was decided that the provider needed 5 hours for the month of October. So that authorization that I showed you earlier would say in this case for Stephen, $375 for work experience services. And so this was for that first meeting and to assist in the job search. So in this example with Stephen, moving ahead, he is offered a job at Walmart and he's set to start on November 5th. And so XYZ is going to assist him with his orientation and also following up with him. And so there's a discussion between your agency and, or in this case, XYZ, and the counselor or pre-ETS rep, whoever it is working with this student, for another authorization for the month of November. And so in this case, it was decided that the provider needed 4 hours. Again, we're going at $75 an hour, which equals $300 for the month of October. So that was an example where a provider is helping a student find a job in the community. This example is Sadie, where she's looking for more of a short-term work experience. So Sadie is a junior in high school who also has never had a job. Her long-term goal is to be a veterinary assistant, so she would like to have a short-term work experience where a provider is going to pay the wages at an animal shelter over the summer to see what working with animals is like. She's also chosen to work with XYZ. So in this case, the counselor pre-ETS rep can authorize to XYZ to develop the work experience site at an animal shelter, as well as to orient her to the experience and follow up with her. Again, now we've maximized the hours to 20 versus 5 hours for this experience. So when you're helping a student set up a work experience, we can go up to 20 hours. So in this case, it was decided for the month of October that the provider needed 7 hours for that first meeting and to help her with finding a site to do her work experience. So in this case, we authorized for $525 for work experience services. So moving ahead with Sadie, XYZ identified a shelter willing to allow her to work at that shelter. And since XYZ will be paying the wages to Sadie during this experience, another authorization needs to be created for those wages. So in this case, we could say, let's say that the entry-level wage for an employee at this shelter is $11 an hour. So the hourly fee to XYZ is $11 an hour plus 25% administrative costs, which in this case comes to $275 an hour. So it's a total of $13.75 an hour that we can fund for wages. And let's say she's working 75 hours in the month of October. So we would do $13.75 times 75, which is $1,031.25 for that authorization. So hopefully that helps a little bit with understanding how authorizations work. Certainly ask me more questions if you have them. We're getting closer to the end. We're going to talk about reports and invoices related to pre-ETS services. So reporting requirements. So in order for VRS to approve an invoice, we must have a report provided along with it. And so this describes what must be included in the report. First of all, a description of the services that were provided, the actual date or dates the services were provided, and then for hourly services, which these will all be, the number of hours provided on each date. Keep in mind that documentation, where say you're doing phone calls or emails, report writing, it's built into the fee structure, so you would not bill that time. We have on here a link to a sample report, so you can see what that would look like. This was a job-seeking skills training class that this individual participated in. So it's one example. We will actually be working, Michelle and I actually are going to be working on creating sample reports for each type of pre-ETS service. So we will get that to you. We have yet to develop that, but we'll provide that to you in the near future when we get those completed. But this gives you an example anyway. And again, just keep in mind, no third-party assessment is allowed, but that student feedback and reflection as well as employer feedback is really ideal to include in those reports. And for those that once they enter into a work experience and you're reporting on how that work experience is going, we have another sample, like a template for that reporting, which is linked on here. I'm not going to open it right now. But you can open that up to see like what sort of items. It's just a sample for you to just remind you about what kind of things we're looking for in terms of a report for once a student's on a work site. And in terms of reporting, your agencies will be able to continue to report into Workforce One through the case notes. So just keep in mind that you'll want to enter a case note, which is the report, at least every time you invoice our agency. So you wouldn't have to necessarily put in a case note every time you see a student, but at least every time you invoice our agency, and it outlines, you know, a description of the services and some of the other things that we noted need to be in a report. And when you enter those into Workforce One, just wanted to remind you that it's important to select in the case note category which pre-ETS services you have provided. So this shows you where you go into where it says case note add, and it's under category, and you can select more than one area by that select deselect option on there. And then the first category you will want when you're entering a report is to be, you want to click on vendor reports because you're basically providing a vendor report. And then you can also click on which of the pre-ETS were provided within that case note category. Okay, invoicing. So your agency is going to need to submit an individual invoice for each student that received services. And each invoice must include the following: dates of the service. As it says here, range of dates is acceptable. So then the report would show actual dates if you had the range on the invoice. You'll want a unique invoice number. You'll want to have our authorization number on there so we can match that to the authorization. You'll want to, from that authorization, you'll have the type of service that you've provided, so you can just copy that onto your invoice, the number of units, which in this case is hours, the cost per unit, so depending on how many students actually attended the program, you'll want to adjust the invoice based on that. So you'll want to say in this case how many students attended so that we know it's the correct cost per unit, and then where the remit to address where we should send the payment to. We require that invoices are submitted within 90 days from the end of the work authorization. Failure to submit within 90 days is considered a material breach of contract and will result in non-payment for that service. So get those in before 90 days. Invoices cannot contain handwritten information, and again, we need a report as well that comes along with the invoice, which would be entered into Workforce One. So we do have a sample invoice for you to look at. We don't need to pull that up. Again, you're linked here so you can look at a sample invoice as well. So just keep in mind too, for submitting the invoice, each VRS office has an email address, so we ask that all invoices are emailed to the office email address. The authorization should have that email address on there. If for some reason it wasn't included, you could ask the VRS staff person for that email address. So coming hopefully in the very near future, I know that tracking hours for students is going to be challenging for your agencies. We are going to be adding in Workforce One a section where you can track the number of hours that you are working with each student. So we're hoping that will be in Workforce One before the end of October. So when that is available, I will be notifying all of you, and probably sending out a mini webinar to you to view so you know how to use it. But it will allow you at the end of, like when you're going to invoice, to pull up a report to know exactly how much to invoice for each student. Also coming, I already mentioned this, that Michelle and I are going to work on sample reports for each pre-ETS service. So when we have those done, we will send those out. I know I've been asked about monitoring. We are going to, within VRS, instituting processes for monitoring within this next year. And so that's not developed at this time, and we will just keep you updated on that. So we would not ask for anything going back, that you wouldn't have. So we will let you know what you're going to need to keep in the future. The only thing right now at a minimum is that you'll want to keep those class lists, which showed how many students actually attended a class. So we'll keep you updated, and there'll probably be an opportunity to weigh in on the monitoring as well. We also hope to provide more webinars going forward. I know we're giving you a lot of information today, so we will have follow-up webinars in the future based on questions or information that you are going to need in order to provide services. All right, so that's it for the content. I know it's quite a bit again, but we want to have some time for you to ask questions. If you could ask questions, type the questions into the Q&A on the screen. We have some time to answer some of your questions.
Yeah, I know some people are using the chat and some people are using the Q&A, and that's just fine. So it looks like there's a question in here that says, is there a number, the hour limit on placement and job search activities?
So again, that limit is the 20 hours if you're helping a student look for a job or look for a work experience site. And again, we can authorize beyond that through our manager approval, but otherwise it's 20 hours maximum.
Okay. And the next one is just that somebody looks like they might need the the information on the PowerPoint and the link, so we'll make sure to get that out to you, Leslie. So any other questions that people have? Again, feel free to put the question in the chat and send it, or in the Q&A.
Okay, the hourly wage, does it include workers' comp, or is that part of the 25% admin? So that is part of the 25% admin.
Great question.
Yep.
Any other questions that people have?
All right.
Yeah, well, I guess one thing, just to reiterate, that we did record this today. It sometimes takes just a couple days to get that uploaded and make sure all the captioning comes together, so you have a nice video package to kind of review. So that should be coming out as soon as that is available to us. And certainly if you have other questions, we do have on the next slide some of the contact information, and you would have had that in your PowerPoint as well for the different individuals here today with Michelle and Melissa. And Kim is...
Yep, Kim Babine is our Director of Community Partnerships, and Ann Paulson reports to Kim. Ann is our VRS Contracting Specialist. So a lot of you, many of you out there who have worked as a lead in your agency with getting the contract together have had interaction with Kim and Ann. But you can always certainly, send anything to me, and anything related to job placement would be to Michelle.
Great. Well, thank you again for your attention today, and thank you for all that you do. You play such an important role with the individuals that we're working with, and so we thank you for that, and we hope this helps give you some of the information you need going forward, but we're always here for the support. So have a great day, everybody, and have a good week.
Thank you.
Thanks, everybody.